Power is intoxicating, and Ethan knew just how to wield it. His badge wasn't just authority, it was control. But today, he wasn't just enforcing the law, he was feeding something deeper, something unspoken. And then he saw her. Confident. Untouchable. A challenge. Rewritten paragraph with a stronger hook and improved engagement. Law wasn't just about justice, it was about control. Ethan thrived on the quiet power he held over people, savoring the flicker of fear in their eyes, the nervous stammer in their voices when he questioned them. He didn't see himself as a bad cop, just one who commanded respect, even if it meant pushing the limits. Some colleagues noticed his patterns, the way certain people seemed to get stopped more often, the way his authority sometimes tipped into something sharper, harsher. But no one spoke up. Ethan was careful, just careful enough to stay out of trouble. That morning, parked on a quiet street, coffee in hand, boredom gnawed at him. The city, wrapped in sluggish gray, felt lifeless. He needed something, someone, to break the monotony. Then, he saw her. A black woman in her mid-30s, moving with effortless confidence. Tailored blazer, crisp slacks, heels clicking with purpose. Shoulders back, chin lifted, like she belonged anywhere she chose. It irritated him. She looked too sure of herself, too untouchable. He had seen her type before, people who didn't flinch under authority, who didn't scramble to appease. His fingers curled around the wheel. She wasn't breaking any laws, but something inside him itched to act. Without a second thought, without calling it in, he flicked on the sirens and pulled up beside her. "Ma'am, stop right there." She halted, her face unreadable. Dark eyes steady. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice was calm, too calm. No fear. No hesitation. Ethan's jaw tightened. Most people stammered, made excuses, but not her. "Let me see your ID," he demanded. A single eyebrow arched, but she complied. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out her wallet and handed over her license. He barely glanced at it before shoving it back. "Never heard of you," he muttered. Then, coldly, "This is a restricted area. Turn around. Hands behind your back." She tilted her head slightly, considering. Then, without protest, she turned and placed her hands behind her back. No resistance. No pleading. It threw him off. He cuffed her, tighter than necessary, but still, she didn't flinch. No struggle. No complaint. As he led her to the patrol car, she finally spoke again, voice smooth, unwavering. "You're making a mistake." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ethan thought he had the upper hand. He thought he was teaching a lesson. But the moment Monica Ellis walked into that courtroom, calm and unshaken, his world began to crack. Because this wasn't just any woman, this was a federal agent. And now, the hunter was about to become the hunted. Rewritten paragraph with stronger engagement and flow. She let out a dry laugh, the sound low and knowing. "You people always say that," she murmured, then sighed. "We'll see." Ethan shoved her into the back seat, slamming the door harder than necessary. His ego felt oddly bruised, though he couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the way she stayed so calm, so in control, like she had expected this. It unsettled him. Most people would be yelling by now, demanding answers, begging for release. But she just sat there, hands resting in her lap, eyes forward, her posture eerily composed. Like she had done this before. A strange unease coiled in Ethan's gut. He didn't take her to the precinct. Too much paperwork, too many questions. Instead, he drove straight to the courthouse. He wanted a judge to handle this quickly. People like her needed to be knocked down a peg, needed to learn they weren't above the law. When he yanked open the door and pulled her out, he expected resistance. Instead, she stepped out smoothly, as if she had planned for this moment all along. "You think this is funny?" he snapped. She met his eyes, unwavering. "No, officer. I think this is interesting." His teeth clenched. "Let's see if you still think it's interesting in front of a judge." Inside, the courthouse was cold and sterile, the air thick with quiet authority. Judge Reynolds, known for his strict rulings, sat at the bench, flipping through paperwork. Ethan felt a flicker of smug satisfaction. This would be over in minutes. Your Honor, this woman was found in a restricted area and refused to comply with police orders, Ethan announced, confidence lacing his tone. The judge barely looked up. Name. The woman stepped forward, brushing a wrinkle from her blazer. Monica Ellis. Ethan sneered. Fake. Probably. But then the judge actually looked up. His eyes flicked between her and Ethan, his brow furrowing. Ms. Ellis, he said slowly, you wouldn't happen to be Special Agent Ellis with the FBI, would you? Ethan's stomach dropped. Monica gave a small, unreadable smile. Yes, Your Honor. Senior Investigator, U.S. Attorney's Office. A stunned silence rippled through the courtroom. Judge Reynolds leaned back, his gaze settling on Ethan. Officer Brooks, did you check her credentials before detaining her? Ethan's throat went dry. She was in a restricted. That wasn't a question. Heat crawled up Ethan's neck. He hesitated, then muttered, No. The judge exhaled heavily. You just unlawfully detained a federal agent. Before Ethan could recover, the doors to the courtroom swung open. A tall woman in a sharp navy suit strode in, and the entire room seemed to shift around her presence. U.S. Attorney Carmen Alvarez, someone whispered. Ethan's pulse pounded. Alvarez didn't waste a second. Your Honor, I've been informed that one of my senior investigators was detained without cause by this officer. She gestured at Ethan, her expression razor-sharp. Judge Reynolds nodded. That's correct. Alvarez's gaze locked onto Ethan, cold and unyielding. We'll be filing civil rights charges. Additionally, we'll be reviewing his entire record for similar incidents. Ethan's blood ran cold. Control had always been Ethan's weapon, his shield. But now, stripped of his badge, his authority, his very identity, he stood exposed. The hunter had become the hunted. And as Monica Ellis met his gaze one last time, her words weren't gloating, they were a reckoning. The word incidents landed like a blow, sharp and final. Ethan's pulse pounded as he tried to push back. This is a misunderstanding. Monica Ellis cut him off, her voice quiet but unshakable. Misunderstanding. She let the word settle in the air, her gaze steady. You saw a black woman near a federal building and assumed she didn't belong. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Silence blanketed the courtroom. Then, the judge's voice cut through it like a blade. Officer Brooks, you are suspended effective immediately. Surrender your badge and weapon before leaving this courtroom. The gavel's crack echoed like a gunshot. Ethan stood frozen, his world collapsing in real time. His career. His reputation. Gone. His fingers felt numb as he unpinned his badge, setting it down beside his gun. The weight of them, once symbols of power, now felt meaningless. As he lifted his gaze, Monica Ellis was watching him. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, just certainty. She stepped forward, voice measured, unshaken. Assumptions, she said, can be dangerous. Ethan had spent over a decade patrolling these streets. The job had never been just about upholding the law, it had been about control. The flicker of fear in their eyes, the nervous stammer in their voices, he had fed on it, thrived on it. He had convinced himself that respect was something he could command, even if it meant bending the rules. Some had noticed how certain people seemed to get stopped more often than others, how his authority sometimes bled into aggression. But no one had spoken up. Ethan had always been careful. Careful enough to avoid trouble. Now, as he stood there stripped of everything he thought made him untouchable, reality sank in. He had been the one to push the boundaries. He had been the one to make the choice. And now, that choice had unraveled everything. Monica Ellis turned without another word, walking away with the same unshaken confidence she had when he first saw her. The same confidence that had set this all in motion. For the first time in his career, Ethan Brooks had no control. Hook, summary of the scene. Ethan thought he was in control. He thought he could bend the rules, push the boundaries, and no one would challenge him. But as the weight of his actions unraveled in the courtroom, one truth became painfully clear. This time, he picked the wrong target. Ethan didn't bother with the precinct. Too much paperwork, too many questions. Instead, he drove straight to the courthouse. He wanted a judge to handle this quickly. People like her needed to be reminded of their place, needed to learn that they weren't above the law. When he yanked the door open and pulled her out, he expected resistance. Maybe fear. Maybe anger. Instead, she stepped out smoothly, her movements deliberate, like she had rehearsed this moment in her mind. "You think this is funny?" Ethan snapped. She met his glare without hesitation. "No, officer," she said evenly. "I think this is interesting." His jaw clenched. "Let's see if you still think it's interesting in front of a judge." Inside, the courthouse air was thick with authority and stale coffee. The kind of place where mistakes became permanent records. Judge Reynolds sat at the bench, known for his strictness, his no-nonsense rulings. Ethan felt a flicker of satisfaction. This was going to be quick. "Your Honor, this woman was found in a restricted area and refused to comply with police orders," Ethan announced. The judge barely glanced up. "Name?" he asked, flipping through his files. The woman stepped forward, brushing an invisible wrinkle from her blazer. "Monica Ellis." Ethan let out a quiet scoff. Probably. But then, something changed. The judge looked up. Really looked. His gaze flicked between Monica and Ethan, his brow furrowing. "Ms. Ellis. You wouldn't happen to be Special Agent Ellis with the FBI, would you?" Ethan's stomach twisted. Monica's lips curved. "Just barely, just enough." "Yes, Your Honor. Senior investigator, assigned to the U.S. Attorney's Office." A ripple of stunned silence spread through the courtroom. Judge Reynolds leaned back, his expression shifting from indifference to something sharper. "Officer Brooks, did you check her credentials before detaining her?" Ethan's throat felt dry. His mind scrambled for an answer. She was in a restricted. That wasn't a question. Then, before Ethan could fully process what was happening, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. A tall woman strode in, her sharp navy suit crisp, her presence undeniable. The room seemed to shift around her. Someone whispered, "U.S. Attorney Carmen Alvarez." Ethan's blood ran cold. Alvarez wasted no time. "Your Honor, I've been informed that one of my senior investigators was detained without cause by this officer." She gestured toward Ethan, her expression hard as steel. The judge nodded. "That's correct." Alvarez's gaze locked onto Ethan like a predator sizing up prey. "We'll be filing civil rights charges. Additionally, we'll be reviewing his entire record for similar incidents." The words hit like a hammer. Ethan tried to interject, tried to regain control. "This is a misunderstanding." Monica's voice cut through his. "A misunderstanding?" She let the words sit in the air before continuing, her voice steady but firm. "You saw a black woman near a federal building and assumed she didn't belong. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice." The courtroom was deathly still. Then the judge spoke, his tone final. "Officer Brooks, you are suspended, effective immediately. Surrender your badge and weapon before leaving this courtroom." The gavel came down with a crack. It sounded like a gunshot. Ethan stood frozen. Everything, his career, his reputation, was gone. Slowly, he unpinned his badge and set it on the table. His gun followed. They had once felt like power. Now, they were just evidence of his downfall. As he lifted his gaze, Monica Ellis was watching him. There was no smugness in her expression, no gloating, just certainty. She stepped forward, her voice measured, unshaken. "Assumptions," she said quietly, "can be dangerous." Then, just like that, she turned and walked away. For the first time in his life, Ethan Brooks had no control.